Hello, and welcome back to the Loco Files. In today's episode, we'll be looking at the Gresley J50s. The Gresley J50s started life as the Great Northern Railway Class J23, which was a class of 060 steam locomotive. They had long side tanks that came out to the front of the smokebox, which sloped forwards to improve visibility and had a recess cut in to aid maintenance. 40 were built by the Great Northern Railway between 1913 and 1922, with a further 62 being added by the LNER between 1924 and 1939. They were given the nickname submarines due to their long tanks. Gresley designed the Great Northern J23s, which were later classified as J51, in 1913 for working the steeply graded lines in the West Riding. Designed to replace the J3, J4 and J7 tender locomotives, an 18.5-inch cylinder diameter was chosen to produce a greater power output. Also, as most of the work involved shunting and short workings, Gresley chose a tank engine design. The tanks increased the adhesive weight, which was particularly useful on the intended steeply graded lines. Traditional Doncaster saddle tanks were rejected in favour of full-length side tanks. These tanks were sloped forward to avoid obstructing the driver's view. The first 30 J51s were built between 1913 and 1919 in 3 batches of 10 locomotives. These initial locomotives used 4-foot 2-inch diameter boilers that were displaced from the Ivert R1 class 082. In fact, much of the original design was based around the size of these surplus boilers. The first batch had a short bunker and were classified J51/1 by the LNER. The prototype J51 had a poor weight distribution. This was solved by blanking off the front of the side tanks and compensating for the lost water capacity with a new tank in the base of the coal bunker. This reduced coal capacity, hence a longer bunker design was used on the second and third batches. These long bunker J51s were classified as J51/2s. All were built at Doncaster with the exception of the last 14, which were built at Gorton. Further orders were placed in 1939 and 1941, totalling 25 more locomotives, but these were cancelled in 1942 after a number of components had already been manufactured. Withdrawals began in 1958 with the arrival of diesel shunters, and ended in 1963 for normal or revenue-earning stock. 7 of them survived into departmental use until 1965. The class became extinct in September of that year when departmental number 14, formerly 68961, was withdrawn and scrapped. Sadly, none have survived into preservation. The newly formed LNER adopted the J50 as the group standard design, and between 1926 and 1939, a total of 62 more members of the class were built. The group standard J50s had a slightly different cab profile to fit the composite gauge. Minor standardization of parts also occurred, and they were switched from left-hand drive to right-hand drive. All of the group standard locomotives were built with steam brakes, except for the last 14, which reverted back to vacuum brakes. Between 1929 and 1935, the J51s were rebuilt as J50s, with larger 4-foot 5-inch boilers. All of the J50s and J51s were built at Doncaster, with the exception of the last 14 locomotives. These were built in 2 batches between 1938 and 1939 at Gorton. In the 1930s there had been a general shortfall in medium-sized shunting locomotive construction. Although the LNER kept planning new J50s, cancellations due to the Depression and various financial crises led to no new J50s between 1930 and 1938. Even though the 14 Gorton J50s were built at the end of the 1930s, the problem was not solved until the immediate post-war period, when the LNER purchased 75 Austerity 060s, which were later classified as J94s. In 1923, it was found that the axle boxes on the J50s and J51s tended to run hot. A survey in the last quarter of 1923 found that 31.2% of the locomotives ran too hot. This was traced to the axle box journals that were the same size as those on the lighter and less powerful J52s. In January 1925, it was decided to fit 5 J50s with new driving wheels and axles with 7.75-inch diameter journals that were 7.5 inches long. Although the original bearings were kept on the leading and trailing axles, the larger bearings on the central axle proved sufficient to solve the problem. All new locomotives were built with the new bearing arrangement, and the existing locomotives were amended accordingly. In December 1939, the J50s were divided into 4 subclasses. The J50/1 was used for the rebuilt J51/1s. J50/2 was used for the rebuilt J51/2s, and the first 2 batches built in 1922 and 24 of the J50s. J50/3 was used for the Group Standard steam-braked locomotives, and J50/4 for the Group Standard vacuum-braked locomotives. Intended for the West Riding, the initial J50 and J51 allocations were to Ardsley, Bradford and Copley Hill. These engines were used for local goods and coal workings, with shunting at intermediate yards. They were also used for shunting the larger West Riding marshalling yards. During the 1920s they were occasionally used for passenger working and for banking duties. The Group Standard J50s were allocated to Ardsley, Bradford, Copley Hill, Doncaster and Eastfield. At about this time, some of the original J50s were moved to Immingham. By 1935, a typical allocation would be Ardsley, Bradford, Copley Hill, Immingham, Frodingham, Stratford, Woodford and Eastfield, with the last 2 batches being spread thinly amongst Norwich, Cambridge, Stratford, Doncaster, Copley Hill, Sheffield, Hitchin, Hornsley, Annesley and Colwick. All of the J50s survived into nationalisation in 1948, when the allocations were generally to Ardsley, Bradford, Copley Hill, Doncaster, Coldwick, Frodingham, Stratford, Woodford, Annesley, Sheffield, St Margaret's and Eastfield. Most were still allocated in the West Riding, with lesser numbers being sent further afield until 1952, when 30 members of the class were allocated to Hornsey to work transfer trips to the southern region. These engines also occasionally worked on empty coach workings between Hornsey and London King's Cross. Withdrawals started in September of 1958 with the arrival of diesel shunters. Withdrawals of the revenue earning stock members of the class were completed in September of 1963, leaving only 7 members of the class in departmental use. The last departmental J50 was withdrawn in September of 1965 and was scrapped that month, consigning the J50s to the history books. In 2013, hopes that the J50s would return from extinction were ignited. The J50 group was a group of young enthusiasts which was set up in 2013 with the aim of building a new J50, which they proposed to be number 8905. The class of locomotive to build was selected on the basis that it resulted in a powerful engine that is well suited for operations on the heritage railways of the country. Unfortunately, by 2018, very little progress had been made, and the funds raised totalled less than £1,000. In February 2019, the J50 group issued the following statement. Due to circumstances beyond our control, it is with regret that the J50 group will be closing. We would like to thank you all for our support and donations. The money raised through our exhibitions will be donated to the new build P2 2007 Prince of Wales. Sadly, once again, resigning the J50s to history. I would like to thank you all for watching and listening. If you liked it, feel free to like, comment down below what you would like to see next. And yes, if you enjoyed it and you would like to find out what we are covering on the next episode, feel free to subscribe. Thank you, and goodbye.